Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Joe Moore, Kyle Buller, Psychedelics today. Talking about breath work today. Kyle, how's it going?
It's pretty good. I actually just wrapped up an interview, which was pretty fun. So just hopping off of that right into here. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Staying really busy. Uh, doing the snow dance every night. So hopefully we get a lot more snow soon here. It's just so everybody knows it's a really low snow situation here in Colorado right now. So I always like for it to be at or above average. So, all right. So, Kyle, today we're going to talk about breath work. You and I have a long history with breath work. And I don't know, I started reading Stan Grof's work in 2001 or so. Breath work probably as early as 2003, I think, are my dates. And then, yeah, it's just been a big part of my life ever since. Can you talk a little bit about how breath work kind of came on your radar?
Yeah, breathwork came on my radar through my time at Burlington College. I was doing my undergrad there in transpersonal psychology, and they just happened to have a weekend workshop in holotropic breathwork. And so you could sign up and you could get one credit for it, which was pretty cool. And it was interesting, like, because your entry point was through Stan's work, right? Like, and then so like you read Stan and then got introduced to breathwork that way as well.
Right. So yeah, I started reading Stan's work. There was like 3 or 4 books at the school's library, which is astonishing. And then Lenny had set up Hollow Interest and Hollow Cert, like these email lists that you could get on. And I just started kind of, stalking that way. So yeah, I hadn't been exposed to drugs really other than cannabis at that point. Maybe 1 or 2 people I knew had, the exotic mushroom stories that I coveted, but,
Yeah.
couldn't access. Um,
And
you know,
were you introduced to like breathwork theory before actually doing breathwork, or did you do
yeah, for
breathwork?
sure. I read tons and tons before I ever got to Dream Shadow in Vermont to do breath work.
Mm,
Which is fascinating, it's certainly a different doorway. And
yeah.
like, how do we uh I love the idea of people prepping a ton before experiences, but also maybe you don't need to.
Yeah.
Um, and that's maybe what we'll get into later after your story here. But yeah.
Yeah, because it was interesting because I just read like Stan's book, like LSD, Doorway to the Numinous. And then I was also reading, there's another book I read, I think that summer, Inner Paths to Outer Space. And it was like Groff, Rick Strassman, a few other authors. And I don't think breathwork was really mentioned in any of that text. Like, I don't remember reading too much about it in LSD, Doorway to the Numinous. But so when I heard about it, I really didn't know much about it. Like, I obviously knew a lot about Stan because I was already reading a bunch of his work, but I was reading his psychedelic work and didn't read his breathwork work. And
Mm,
so when that class came up, I also didn't really know what to expect because I didn't actually read any of his breathwork material. But I kept hearing a lot of the students talk about it that went, and they just kept saying like, oh man, that's a really wild thing. It's like so psychedelic. And like I've had like really profound psychedelic experiences with it. And I kept like kind of rolling my eyes, going like, yeah, okay. Sure. Yeah. Whatever you say.
yeah. And then my first experiences were relatively mild. There was stuff happening. But what I saw in the room, other people having pretty robust experiences was potentially the more compelling thing than my own experience to say like, oh, these people, you know, they're they're having some really robust things go on. I think I want to come back.
Mm.
um, and a lot of hard work and a lot of weird experiences. And I started, having big helpful things happen.
When you say like your first experience was like mild, like what was that experience like?
Um, a lot of effort. Um, not much like, robust stuff happening. Um, I had some, quasi transpersonal looking things, or at least symbolic things happening at the end. Um, And, I thought that was pretty interesting. I think like, what was it? I, I don't love putting this out on the air, everybody. Like I try to keep this stuff secret. It's been mostly like a decade, so I'm happy to come out with it. But, very large black snake in the
Mm,
background, very large. And then Sanskrit letters on all the fingers.
mm,
I didn't know Sanskrit, but I was putting a lot of weight in Sanskrit at that point in my life. So it's like an interesting kind of symbol set. I looked at my mandala recently, and it was
mm.
pretty neat to go look at that years later. Mandala, it's kind of our breathwork lineage term for the picture you do at the end, a little bit of art or expression, visual expression you do. Yeah, we'll get into that later,
You have a
maybe.
ton of them too. It was really cool seeing some of those, like, at the recent workshops where you brought those out for folks to look at. Um,
Yeah, I think it's a really cool learning tool because you tell people you have to do art, and the first thing they do is panic. Um, but artistic expression is a core part of it. But how do you make it okay for people to like understand that a stick figure or a couple color blotches is fine?
yeah.
You know, and leading with vulnerability is the way, is my way, at least.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for doing that. So did your we kind of had like different entry points. And I think we've talked about this before, but like, because you've done a lot of breath work before psychedelics, and I was like the opposite, where I just like was doing psychedelics, and then breath work was like pretty grounding for me. So like, did your breath work experiences change after psychedelics, or did breath work also yeah, inform how you approach psychedelics in a way?
Radically informed how I approach psychedelics. So my first time trying to consume mushrooms, I grew
Mm,
after years of breath work. And then, really, really light doses in a fairly safe container. And then, the first time I tried to really, really go for it, I was all alone, but, I did the music, I did the laying down, I had the eye shades. Um, yeah, all with stuff I grew, which is fascinating. So I was trying to like use Groff method for how I was approaching psychedelics. Groff
mm.
method breathwork. Is that what we want to call it these days? um,
I
Groff
don't
method.
know.
Let's call it Groff lineage breathwork practices. Uh, yeah,
That works. Yeah.
cool,
Well,
cool. And just so everybody understands, there's a number of organizations that um, facilitate and teach people how to do this stuff. As of 2025, Kyle and I do not teach people how to do breath work. I'm not even certified to facilitate breath work with any organization. That hasn't stopped me from facilitating a lot. And the organizations that we'll kind of like talk about in this context is Groff Transpersonal Training. They were the ones that Stan and Christina kind of started way back. It's operated by Carrie Sparks these days, so longtime kind of student of Stan. There's Groff Legacy Training, which Stan is now a part of. There's a number of people we know and are friendly with that are in that organization too. Um, we're mostly affiliated with Dream Shadow. And Kyle, you're a certified facilitator in Dream Shadow
mhm.
breathwork, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And
I was going to say GTT, they certify holotropic breathwork facilitators. So like when they talk about holotropic breathwork, that's certified through GTT. And then, yeah, the Groff split off and created Groff breathwork a few years ago. And then our teachers, Lenny and Elizabeth, they kind of branched off and created Dream Shadow. So just some context there as we navigate terms and trademarks and stuff like that.
yeah, cool. And we'll get into some of the differences and all that later, but really let's set the stage, Kyle. You just spent a lot of time developing a program introducing the concept of breathwork to a psychedelic audience. Can you share a little bit about what you built there?
Yeah, so we ran this course actually live. What was it, last spring? And it was 6 weeks.
It's really
And
fun.
yeah, it was. And now we're starting to I'm re-recording it, just so it's yeah, not just like the live presentations with everybody, for a self-study on our psychedelic education center. And the idea is really it's like, how do we integrate breath work into our psychedelic practice? And so how can we utilize different breath practices for preparation also different breath practices for navigating the psychedelic space, and then also for the integration side of things. So really looking at breath as a tool that we can start to use in our preparation, in the navigation, and in the integration of psychedelics. And so we just kind of outline the foundation of like, where breathwork started, some of the different theories and schools, how it impacts our physiology and mind, and then talk about these different traditions, talking about like holotropic breathwork, dream shadow, kind of a little bit of the differences there. And then some somatic theory and trauma informed theory. So we can start thinking about like when we are working with folks, whether it is just in preparation or if you're holding space for others, how can we, give those clients tools or yourself these tools as you're navigating it as well to do some self-regulation. So you can like, hopefully regulate and titrate the experience. What happens when it gets too much and you're like, what do I do? This is becoming a really bad trip. Being able to use the breath and different somatic stuff to work through that experience. And so, yeah, we're just really kind of like outlining, what does it look like to incorporate breath and somatic practice into our preparation and the navigation of the psychedelic experience, and also on the integration side of things.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. And it's an impressive looking program. So nice work there. But I love teaching it live. It was so fun. Sharing it with so many people. It was a substantially big audience from what I remember.
Yeah, it was huge.
Yeah. So yeah, what we did here is pre-recorded at your own pace. We'll probably throw in some kind of meet with us time so you can kind of do an AMA office hours deal. But yeah, so it's kind of like back up, like breath work. When we say breath work, I'm almost at the point where I'm like a little annoyed when people say breath work now. I do breath work. I'm like, cool. Like, what do you mean?
It's an
And
umbrella term. Yeah, it means a lot of different things.
yeah, and I'm like at the point where I don't love asking. So I'm like, did you do yoga training? Did you go to Wim Hof? Did you do like this 9D thing? Like there's a few other somewhat popular schools right now, right?
There's like neurodynamic, transformational breath work, shamanic breath work. Yeah, you said 9D breath work. There's Soma breath work. There's Wim Hof breath work. Then you get into like the more of that holotropic Groff style with holotropic or Groff breath work or dream shadow. And then you have people just like branching off and, doing all sorts of different stuff. You have rebirthing breath work. So it is an umbrella term, and there's so many different perspectives on this. And so it's just we're also trying to like not go through every little thing because there's so much out there, and I feel like it's so hard to cover every little technique out there. But what are just like kind of like the foundations of a lot of these? And I always think about like something my advisor in my grad program for my somatic courses said. She's like, there's so much splitting that happened in the somatic world where it seemed like, this is kind of how she described it, was like, it's like Pat Ogden, Ron Kurtz, Peter Levine, they were all kind of doing some stuff together. And then they all split off, and Pat Ogden created sensory motor, Ron Kurtz created Hakomi, Peter Levine created somatic experiencing. And so you do see a lot of like splitting that happens. People get trained, they start adopting the practice and figuring out like what works, what doesn't work. Maybe they're going to change it. Maybe there's a different philosophy that they're approaching things from. And then they branch off and create like a different school. And so that's why, yeah, it is an umbrella term. It can mean a lot of different things. And there's also differences in the techniques that people are creating. So it can be really confusing to navigate. Like I do hear a lot of folks say like, oh, I had a holotropic breathwork session like online that was like 30 minutes. And I'm like, well, that's not holotropic breathwork, So terms also get tossed around a whole bunch. And so, just something to be mindful of as if you're interested in breath work, as you're seeing like, what do I do? It can be really important to like, just do some research on like, who do they study with? What is the practice, and et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for that. Yeah. I was at this retreat in Costa Rica. We did breath work for 42 minutes exactly. There was a lot of talking and coaching, and that was holotropic breath work. I'm like, oh God. Like, no, there's a lot going on there. It's a convenient term for people to throw around. Um, and I think, they've tried to protect it as a trademark, done, almost okay there. But I think it's a very specific technique and a very specific context. And um, yeah, it requires a lot of attention. I love the question, Kyle, like, oh, do you do this at home by yourself? I'm
Yeah.
like, oh God, like, no, because it's like that's not what it is. It's a technique that you do in a big context, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Um,
like group process is part of that, right? It's meant to be done in a group and not versus at like home. And there's nothing wrong with like some of those techniques at home, right? Like I do it sometimes and really need it. And it's really helpful. And
yeah, moving energy, go for it. Like if
yeah.
if if you know yourself, you can trust yourself. I try to tell people not to do it because I think people can theoretically end up in somewhat spicy situations. It's like,
Mhm.
for the same reason I'm not telling people to eat mushrooms at home alone.
Right.
You can have very, intense experiences that could get you in a little bit of trouble or, yeah. So, I think people with this kind of breathing technique need to be a little careful, but
Mhm.
also play with your breath. It's yours.
Yeah.
You can experiment. You should have agency over what you do at home.
Agreed. And in this course, we do explore different breath practices, and it's stuff that you will be doing at home, maybe by yourself. But some of them are a little bit more gentle. And I always really encourage people to kind of feel into what feels right for them, and not needing to make big experiences happen, especially if you are doing this by yourself.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about a little bit of the history. Well, yeah. Let's just say the history of breath work in psychiatry, psychology, psychoanalysis. So, the first thing that we generally talk about, Kyle, and you're going to have some things. So, fill in where I'm kind of missing. Is we talk about Wilhelm Reich doing breathing
Mhm.
exercises while he's doing psychoanalysis with his people. So maybe the first 10, 20, 30 minutes of his psychoanalysis sessions would be accelerated breathing. Um, and I think a lot of that was to, you know, disturb, I don't know his language, the um, character armor. I wanted to find
Mhm.
the original term, but the character armor get a little disturbed and disorganized so you can actually work on stuff underneath it, right?
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah, that was
your understanding of the first?
That was the idea. Yeah, and I think, like, that's where I start also in the course, like, describing, like, Reich and talking about his work. Because yeah, he in the somatic world, they do call him, like, the father of somatic psychology, and always kind of preface to Reich had a pretty controversial life, especially towards the end, and kind of like a pretty interesting figure, but yeah, so, I mean, he was really, I think, the first more kind of like in the Western development of breath work and more kind of like psychology, psychiatry. And that idea was that, yeah, we have this quote unquote character armoring that's like really like chest, abdomen. And how do we loosen that? And how does character armoring play a role in like psychopathology? And, you would always say something along the lines that like neuroses can be like found throughout the entire body. So like even just paying attention to like how somebody's posture is, how they're showing up, how that character armoring is presenting, we can maybe do an assessment around that posture and maybe what people need. And I know Alexander Lowen also takes that through bioenergetics, who's, again, another example. Alexander Lowen was a student of Reich, took some of the Reichian stuff that he learned and created bioenergetics. And then I forget who studied under Lowen, but then they took that and created core energetics. And so you can see kind of how that starts to happen. But yeah, body posture, deeper breathing to start to work with this character armoring. Character vegeto analysis, I believe, is the
Nice work.
therapy.
Yeah. Nice pull. Yeah, I'm reminded of a Robert Anton Wilson play that he wrote called Wilhelm Reich in Hell,
Mm.
which I really want to see it. See if anybody has the video, send it over. But yeah, this idea that breath, where did this come from? I think there was a current in European psychology of mesmerism, like proto hypnosis, and breathing would have been part of that. So he probably had some exposure to that. And yeah, who knows really where it came from. Anyway, there's a whole history of it. And, globally, we have a huge history of breath. All of us are
It's
breathing. When we
cultural.
stop
Yeah.
breathing, we're in big trouble. And then, if you breathe in different ways, you can modify your psyche. This is one of the very few, maybe the only things that's in between the unconscious and conscious mind. Like you stop paying attention, you're breathing still. But the idea is that because we can manipulate that thing potentially, this is kind of an abstracty kind of like fun idea. It's between subconscious and conscious. And when we're playing with this function, the breath, we can then access things that we wouldn't be able to access otherwise through more conscious means. I think Wim Hof kind of plays with this a little bit. Some of the other schools do too. Yeah, and in psychedelic sessions, like I remember my big ayahuasca session where I was just like holding on, and part of my holding on was helping stay focused, like staying really focused through the breath and like
Yeah.
staying with it, and that being a constant anchor for hours and hours, and really helpful. I couldn't imagine if I was so disorganized that I didn't have my breath jumping in there. Um, yeah, which I don't know. Maybe that's a crux keeping me from too many ego deaths. Uh, um,
Or being able to manage the ego death in a different way, being able to stick with it a little bit more than maybe just being completely overtaken by fear and anxiety.
so the well, a few things. So a lot of people hear breathwork, they kind of roll their eyes like you did, and then you're just like, oh, maybe this is just kind of junk. Like, why would I do that if I could eat these psychedelics or smoke this thing? Um, and there's a lot of reasons to do that.
Fair question.
But
And
yeah, let's talk about like the big obvious one that people have is like, can I still have big experiences here, and are they as meaningful? And like, can you have ego death here? I annoyed by the ego death term. I'm going to try to stop using it. Uh, but yeah, what do you think?
you can definitely have big experiences with doing breath work for sure. That's what got me turned on to it. When I first went to that workshop in 2010, I breathed on Halloween, and I did it the second day. So I was able to be in the room and watch everybody. And I just kept thinking, I'm watching everybody kind of like have these big emotional catharsis, physical catharsis. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, people are making this shit up. Like, this is not real. There was a part of me, I'm like, what is going on right now? This stuff seems so wild and weird. And people are probably just over exaggerating a lot of this stuff. So again, my skeptical mind was like still on and thinking like, what's going on here? To the point where I'm like, do I leave? Like, what did I just sign up for? This also seems really weird. And when I had my first experience, I mean, I was completely blown away. I mean, it was a full on psychedelic experience for me. Reliving things that I had in a psychedelic experience, relived like a birth process, also relived like parts of like this near death experience that I often talk about. And I was just like really blown away by like, how could that be possible? By just like breathing deeply with music in a group. And, it just really, really got me so interested in it. And that's not all the time, and I always like to remind people that like, yes, sometimes this happens and we can have really big experiences. Other times you fall asleep and it's boring and you rest for 3 hours. And so you can have the range of experience. And there's nothing wrong with that rest. The times that where I've had those rest experiences and quote unquote nothing happening, I've also found great benefit in it where I'm like, oh, wow, like I actually just spent 3 hours just turning my brain off and resting for a bit. And I actually really needed that because I haven't been able to create that time in my life to just do that and in that type of capacity. And so there's also benefit in there of like when the quote unquote things don't happen, can actually be the medicine that we're probably looking for. But in terms of your question around also ego death, um, yeah, that's like an interesting thing because I think like I don't know, I've examined my near-death experience, where I'd say, like, was there a loss of ego? Did I have ego death? I don't know if it was like full on, dying of the ego. There was a part of me that felt like that well, I was physically dying, but like there was a part of me that was still online, and then there was a part of me that was like kind of elsewhere. When I had my first ego death experience with psilocybin and psychedelics, that part like wasn't online at all. It was like, who the hell am I? Like when I was actually dying, there was a part of me I knew who I still was, but there was also like this weird mystical spiritual thing unfolding. And I've had that with psychedelics, but there's this part where I'm like, I don't know my name. I don't know anything about myself. I don't know what year it is. I don't know where I am in space and time. And I've kind of had like a little bit of that in breathwork experiences where like maybe I don't know what time it is, or like maybe I'm so in an experience where I'm just kind of like confused. But I don't think I've ever had like a full on ego dissolution, ego death like I've had on psychedelics. And maybe psychedelics are just really unique with that. Um, where it's just like, yeah, you can forget your name, you can forget like where you are, who you are, like what the hell is going on. But I've also had that with cannabis too, not just even psychedelics. But I don't think I've ever had
Mhm.
like full on ego death with breath work. Have you? Or like, how do you define ego death, and how do you kind of
Oh
explore
god,
that?
I find it so problematic as a term, because we don't, as a culture, have a great definition for ego. And then, like,
Right.
ego death, it's like, what are we talking about and why? Like, I like a way I've heard Stan talk about it in the past where it's like, the persona, like,
Mm,
kinda loses its energy, maybe. This is, like, wildly deep paraphrasing, so,
yeah.
I'm not quoting Stan here at all. But, like, the persona as a mask, like, we think about the Greek, like, the persona just kind of, like, fading away, and then the real you still persists. So, like, those elements that aren't the real you, that are kind of like, your construct through which it helps you kind of, like, navigate the world, that goes away, and then you're just there, realizing that those things are kind of constructs. Um, I don't necessarily think you need to have like the I'm dying, I'm freaking out, I'm scared thing
Yeah.
for it to be like ego death. Um, yeah. So, I don't know. I'm not one of these redditors that's like focused on ego death competitions or something.
No,
I think
no.
there's potentially value there clinically, but I don't know. Um, yeah. So anyway, I think the point I like to make about the intensity in breath work is that it can be as intense as psychedelic sessions. Like maybe certain features of the experience would be a little different, but
Mhm.
maybe not. Maybe there's a lot of overlap too. Like I think my biggest breathwork experience is on par with my monster LSD overdose and my
Mm.
big ayahuasca experience. So
That's how I feel
um
too. Yeah.
yeah, and Stan and Lenny had conversations about this, like, same thing, like, Stan's done a lot of LSD and, sat for a lot of LSD and, I don't think he would be a believer in holotropic breath work and these other methods if well, same method, different trademark, I guess, kinda not. Don't sue me, anybody. But yeah, like, the idea that there's, a lot of similarity and a lot of overlap. And then I model it, Kyle, to say like this is all just us,
Mhm. Yeah.
like and we have the ability to have this magic on board all the time. I remember talking to some DMT people about it and they were like, this actually makes it feel less magical
Mm.
that we
That
can
it's
have these
you.
experiences without a drug. Yeah. I'm like,
Mhm. Mm.
I don't follow, but I think it's really cool that it's all in us.
Well, I mean, if we look cross-culturally throughout like history, right? It's like humans have always had some sort of relationship with consciousness, whether it was through meditation, whether it was through breath work, different breathing practices, whether it was through psychedelics, whether it was through yoga, really intense rites of passages, to bloodletting, to isolation, to other types of vision quests. Like we humans have figured out a way to engage with this, and they sometimes get to the same place, right? And maybe it's not as colorful or geometric as like one technique. And so I always think it is that amplification of ourself in our relationship to the universe, however you want to define that. But we're able to open up to ourselves and whatever else is there when we can engage with these practices. And if you have yogis or meditation teachers and gurus and talking about a similar kind of like enlightenment experience that somebody on DMT or psychedelics is having, how do you analyze that, right? It's like, okay, well, one had like all these geometric forms and like entities. This was like a different type of experience where it's maybe you're not having those entities, but then you get into some traditions and they talk about entities in their meditation and they have their whole realms that they go through. And it's like, if you were to hear that at face value, be like, wow, this sounds like a DMT trip, but maybe you're not getting all the fractal geometric hallucinations with it, but it's a different type of experience. And so I always do like to frame it that way. I think Lenny has done a good job framing it that way too, is that like all these are vehicles and they're amplifiers of ourself. And there's just different avenues to get there. And I would say that they're all valid. One's not valid, one's not valid because you didn't take a drug and you didn't have this like really profound experience. If somebody found or relived a trauma doing breath work, is that just as valid as taking MDMA and reliving your trauma and healing from it? And say, yeah, they're different paths.
Yeah. And sometimes we want to think like, oh, I'm on this one path with ayahuasca, and the things that I learned there aren't going to show up in my other kind of worlds, which isn't really true. Like, it's the things that you developed elsewhere are going to show up. It's always ingredient in the experience in the current moment that's developing. And I think it's complicated because there's so many ideologies and metaphysics we get pushed being in the psychedelic space. And it's so hard to navigate. But I'm just giving you all compassion out there. Like, this is not an easy space to understand.
Infinitely complex. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So again, let's just remind everybody, this is promoting a class that Kyle just put together that we taught earlier this year, maybe in the spring. And it's a Foundations of Breathwork class. It's going to help you wrap your head around the breathwork topic in a framework that's compatible with the psychedelic, frameworks that we teach. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're not giving you facilitator training here, but you're going to walk away with some stuff you can do on your own, some stuff you might be able to try with clients or friends here and there. But yeah, it's a step one.
And I think it is important to for us to cultivate these practices ourselves, especially if we are doing a lot of this inner exploration. As you said, Joe, I wish everybody could do these practices before engaging in psychedelics, because it helps to provide that foundation. And I think the more I've been doing this work, the more I think I've been focused on what are these foundational skills that we can use when we go into these spaces without necessarily just jumping into the deep end. Like, most of us wouldn't jump into the deep end. Maybe unless you're pretty naive, you're a kid and your friends are daring you to. I used to be a lifeguard and that used to happen. But for the most part, people were scared of the deep end if they couldn't swim. They would want to dip their toes in a little bit and get used to the water. You wouldn't ride a black diamond if you're a beginner skier or snowboarder. You're going to take the bunny slopes and learn those foundational skills. And I think right now in our culture, psychedelics are very trendy and people are just wanting these quick fixes and big changes. And, psychedelics are kind of being sold like that. And, I think we're probably guilty of talking about it in early days and probably having podcasts and headlines that kind of show that. But it's what's the work that we're bringing into the psychedelic experience, and how do we build those foundational skills? If we look at other traditions, like in shamanic practices or yoga, right? You didn't just go blast off. There are usually stepping stones to get there. But we live in this like interesting time in the world where we just have instant access to things in a way, and we can just jump into the deep end without necessarily building the foundation. And so I think that's a big also part of the reason of like putting this type of course together. It's like, how do we start to talk about these foundational skills that we can practice before actually doing these deep dives? And I think, I've over the year, I'm like, wow, like my psychedelic experiences have changed since doing more of these practices. It allows me to hold traumas that are emerging. It's making me more aware of my window of tolerance versus like before I was just in the deep end. I'm like just drowning, I'm like, what the fuck is going on right now? Whereas like, that can still happen. But it's just like, I feel like I'm a little bit more aware on like how to work with the difficulty that's coming up. But you also just never know. Psychedelics are unpredictable. And, sometimes you've been having really great sessions and all of a sudden you get struck by lightning and you're like, what the hell just happened there?
Yeah. I'm like, one of the risks and one of the dangers in psychedelia is kind of keeping up with the Joneses, you know, like, oh, this is an interesting community and scene. I'm going to try to get as many experiences as I can so I can be part of this community and scene, and be more accepted. Um, and that's really risky. I think people
Yeah.
should really, if they can, go slow, do as little as possible for the first while, because it's a lot less work. If you could, if you do too much LSD or something, you might require a reasonable amount of therapy afterwards, or you could end up with HPPD, which not very many people have good frameworks for treating, or whatever it is, right? It's
I
like,
think that's
don't
an
treat it like
important
Pokemon.
Yeah, I feel like that's like an important conversation that like we don't always talk about. Like I think about when I ended up going to Burlington College and like studying transpersonal psychology and psychedelics. It's like I was actually, I think, using that as a way to treat all my psychedelic trauma.
Mm,
It was like I needed to do all this work from like all the stuff I was experiencing with those psychedelics, where I'm like, I think I just traumatized myself by like all this big stuff coming up too quickly and not knowing how to contain it in my nervous system and actually work with it. And I think like I just was like, oh man, I'll just do more. I'll just do it again and see what happens. And that's probably not the best way to go about doing things. Take your time and really integrate.
hmm Yeah. So the idea is that we have this body-based practice that allows you to experiment with these states in a really, really safe container, with other people, um, all around. So it's not even just one-on-one, which is a little exposed. It's not even, you alone. Um, but it's you within a big group. So you have some safety there. And I think that's huge. And let's kind of talk about Groff lineage breath work and like the components. So we have accelerated breathing. We've got
Evocative
mm,
music.
thank you. I got stuck on the body work component because we had some interesting conversations about body work recently. But yeah, we've got the evocative music, body work, artistic expression, group process, and then a friend told me once safety is the sixth
Mm.
ingredient. Which, we don't really name that usually when we give the list, but it's important, and I think it's clever to use that as a sixth ingredient. Um, body work, stuff comes up in your body. Sometimes it helps to get a little pressure or express it or press against it or whatever it is, wherever it is. This is not doing massage. This is not any kind of like programmatic technique. This is like, oh, my hands feel a little funny. Maybe press, or oh. Mhm.
Yeah, I've been thinking about like other terms. I know like there's some people that call it focus body work. I forget like what some of my other friends and colleagues have called it. But I think body work is part of it. But yeah, is there like a different term there too? Like I think we talked about this on like the one podcast that we did last month or 2 months ago. I kind of see it more as like a supportive process for a person. They have a type of experience that they want to express, or that that might be coming up in their body, And how do we support that process? And so that expression might be, I have tingling in my hands. My hands want to push against something. So it's like, how do we support that process of somebody pushing? Or, somebody needs a supportive process in, relaxing. That's something I've been also exploring. It's like, sometimes people say, I have a hard time relaxing right now, or I have this like, pit in my stomach. So I also think it's like, how do you support people in that? And that might not actually be hands-on. That might just be actually asking somebody like, what does it feel like to relax right now? And then they're doing kind of like their own process into that. And so, sometimes people can do their own body work, right? But it gets in this position where it's like you get an angle where you can't do that. Like I do a lot of my own stuff when I do breath work, but then I get into these situations where I need to like push or I want to express something, and I just can't contain that. And I need support and somebody to create that container to express that. So, maybe it's just like the towel thing comes up a lot for me with the neck. And it's like, I need somebody there to like do this towel thing with my neck because I could do that myself, but it's actually really helpful if somebody else is holding that tension there and I'm, projecting that feeling out onto the towel there. So I don't
Let's
know.
have
Yeah.
you kind of describe that towel technique, the neck technique. Just not everybody's watching the video.
Oh,
Um,
right.
yeah. So it's a weird one. It
So
feels edgy.
definitely edgy. And you don't do it with everybody, right? It's like not something you always bring up. But like the idea is, and I found this to be helpful. So I think I have a lot of energy that comes up in my neck and my jaw when I do breath work. And so you can have two people sit beside you and they hold a towel just above your neck. And the idea is that the breather takes it and grips it. And then you're kind of transferring that energy into the towel. And so you could say anger lives in this area, right? Stress and anger. And so if somebody's just holding and having the tension on the towel, so it creates that tension that I could grip it in a way. And then I'm actually like just gripping the towel and projecting that anger out onto it. So it might look like this, and I'm like screaming into it. And so, like, I'm not choking myself, I'm not doing anything. I'm just using this as a way to like take that anger out of my hands and my throat, and using the towel as a way to use it, project onto it in a way. So that's kind of like the basic idea. And yeah, I don't know, I've always found that to be helpful to express an experience.
Mhm.
And doesn't, sometimes it doesn't work, and then I go, I don't want to do this, and
Yeah.
then you don't do it.
Do you like so it's funny, right? Because there's like the facilitators, the support people, like that's we're not really doing anything other than standing there in that one and kind
Yeah.
of like, hey, maybe try this.
Yeah.
And if you don't, all good. Um, and then yeah, it's funny how it can get a little kind of complicated to express that. But let's keep staying on uh breath work more generally. We can do kind of like a series on body work again in the near term, or let's say work that relates to the body.
Yeah. Come up
You
with a
know,
new term, maybe.
yeah, maybe. If anybody has ideas, info at psychedelics day, or hit us up on socials. But yeah, like really there's, this artistic expression thing, which is super cool. There's, the music. I love that. I'm building a music class. We should have that out in a few weeks, hopefully. Um, so stay tuned, everybody, for that. Music psychedelics, but informed heavily by the Groff breathwork lineage. And then let's see what else. Group process is interesting. Like it's, you know, doing something alone versus doing something when 10 people are watching you or doing it at the same time. So different. I was thinking about this in the context of did you ever see the meditation studies where it's like meditators meditate together and they have this like kind of coherence effect on each other, and there's like enhanced effect when they're doing it together?
Makes sense. I don't think I've seen
Yeah.
any of those studies, but
um, a lot of the transcendental meditation people like were, it was so expensive, so they had a lot of money for research. um
yeah.
uh yeah, I didn't get training, but I got pretty deeply indoctrinated there. But the idea is that when you're doing the same thing, you can kind of get entrained, kind of
Yeah.
like mirror neurons. Maybe there's some sort of energetic thing going on. But chanting together, like doing kirtan together, super interesting feeling versus doing it alone. And then even watching movies in a theater versus watching at home alone, super different experience.
Mm-hmm.
Concerts, like listening to Fish at home and recording versus being there, very different energetically.
Yeah.
um, watching basketball, same thing. Anyway, so being in a group, doing kind of this inner work together feels more supportive to me. Sometimes it can feel exposing to people if they're not ready to come out about material
Mm-hmm.
that they don't want to share, which is totally fine. You don't have to share stuff. But I think there's something to these group things. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely, I always think about something Lenny always mentioned, like we're the descendants of successful tribes, and folks that usually went off on their own usually didn't make it. And that is our most primal fear, right? And it is like almost embedded. Like, what if I'm not accepted into the group? Then I'm all alone. And so, we are working with like some of that primal energy of like, we are meant to be in relationship, but that can also be scary because of maybe being pushed outside the group. There's a really great book by Louis Cozolino called The Neuroscience of Human Relationships, or maybe just The Neuroscience of Relationships. And it goes into a lot of details around the brain being a social organ, that it's really wired for communication and connection. And he also talks about like mirror neurons and how powerful that is, and how getting in that resonance, how much the brain actually tries to pick up a lot of nonverbals, and how we are kind of just sending messages to each other sometimes by not always verbalizing things. And so I think the group experience is really powerful. It's also not just like the breathwork experience, but also like the sharing, to be heard, seen, and witnessed by your peers or by a group, to know that you're not alone. That's also really powerful, just to come together with like other like-minded people and share a story and not feel judged. That's really profound, because you might be in circles where you share something and there's judgment that comes up, and then you shut down and you don't want to share, because of things that have happened in the past. So I think the group process is a really big part of this. And I think a lot of like therapeutic work that is kind of done in group, it's like, how much does the group actually play a role in that healing or therapeutic process?
Right. And then there's this aspect of agency, and you're the world's foremost expert in you. And like I love this kind of, I don't know about inversion, but the idea that you being supported in your process of self-discovery versus like being told about you. Um and there's also this element of, by controlling the breath, by controlling, if you're going to do body work or not, and what kind, and whatever, you're actually gaining more agency and healing through agency. And I find that really clever. Was that part at all of your capstone project, trauma
The,
informed breath
the,
work?
um, I might have written about it, but I know that was also part of my process too, where I think when I was doing a lot of healing work, seeking after like, different healers, different techniques, substances, and trying to like place all that agency and authority onto that person. And I think when I came across breath work, it was like, oh, wait, this is me. Like, I'm doing this. Like, I don't have the acupuncturist like sticking needles in me to try to heal me. I'm not taking a psychedelic to try to heal me, and having like this external like substance impacting. I'm not going to my shamanic healer to try to get healing done. It was like, oh, this is me. This is my experience, and I get to also control it. If it's getting too intense, I slow the process down and stop breathing. And I can just lay here, and nobody's going to tell me to keep breathing. Like, I can just lay here if I want to lay here. And I think that is something that's like really nice about that practice, is like the agency, because I think a lot of, in healing too, a lot of us were ripped from agency when we think about traumas and things that have happened to us. to try to, just regain control is terrifying. To trust again can be really terrifying. And so I think that whole process of like trusting yourself, going where you need to go, can be really profound. And I think that was a big part of my healing process and why I really started to gravitate towards breath work. It was like, stop trying to put this on everybody else to do this for me. I now have this like container where I can like explore this myself, without that external factor. I mean, obviously there's external factors, right? You have the group, you have the music, you have all this stuff, but it
Right.
feels like it's
Kinda,
you.
yeah, in a temporary uh temporary relationship with a group of people that can be really helpful. A thing I never really got the chance to ask you, Kyle, is around this window of tolerance concept and trauma. And you were talking a little bit about like with some psychedelic experiences, you could push the gas a little bit too hard and end up with some traumas. And I'm wondering about the relationship of that kind of concept to this window of tolerance framework, where like if you can tolerate something, as opposed to like kind of falling apart in these upper limit experiences. I don't know, high stress outside. Is that like, is there some sort of way to skillfully speak about those periods of time outside of your window of tolerance being traumatic? Is that a framework that people talk about?
I think like people are starting to talk about it a little bit more.
Hmm.
Now that like somatic and nervous system stuff is becoming a little bit more like buzzwords and like trendy. So I'm glad people are starting to talk about this stuff. But yeah, it's like what happens like when we take on too much stress, too much fear, too much panic, right? It's like body either goes into like fight or flight or freezes and shuts down, right? And it's like it's just our nervous system like can't really tolerate it, so we go into like these survival mechanisms. And like when we're having like these really difficult psychedelic experiences, like how is that flood of like information putting you into flight or fight, or you kind of go into like a freeze and shutdown mode, right? And it's like just too overwhelming for you to actually like process the information. And how
Yeah.
can that then compound and possibly leave a little bit of like, yeah, trauma and distress in the nervous system where you're like, am I going to do that again? Right. And you hear this from folks that have had really bad trips, and they're still processing it like a year out or like 2 years out. And they're like, I don't know if I'll ever touch psychedelics again. Like that was terrifying. And, I know Terrence McKenna got criticized for this, because there was a point in his life where I think he actually stopped eating mushrooms. And I forget where it's written, or who talks about it, but it's like he had just one really bad trip, and it freaked him out supposedly, and he kind of stopped, for I don't know if he stopped completely or if it was for an extended period of time. And it's like, how is that continuing to live inside of you, you know
Hmm. Yeah. Best we know, it was the rest of his life, and stuff can be really scary. Yeah, and
yeah.
really leave a mark. And yeah, I wonder. And we're talking about like actual trauma, not like I'm traumatized because I missed the bus. Like
Right.
really serious stuff. And yeah, so breath work I like as a means towards regulation, a means towards I have agency over my body, nervous system. And then with psychedelics, I think it's a really helpful way to um help people kind of, I don't know, swim through the experience, float through the experience a little bit.
Stay
Um,
grounded. An
mhm,
example that I sometimes give, it's like I was doing a ketamine training, and after the second shot, and it was a pretty low dose, like compared to like what everybody got. I mean, it was pretty low dose,
mhm,
and that started to bring up all my near death experience trauma. And so it's like,
mm,
here's a trauma that lives inside of me. It's starting to then hijack my system as I'm starting to relive this experience under the ketamine. And then coupled with like the dissociative effect of ketamine, and now it's like playing onto, am I dying actually? And so it's like coupled with, I feel like I'm back in the ER. I just got these shots which I hate shots because like when I was in that situation and my veins were collapsing, they just kept jabbing me with needles. Sorry if that's triggering for folks, but it's like, this was starting to come up in this session, and this is starting to then activate my nervous system. And then I'm starting to get into like this fight or flight response. I need what's going on. Like, I need to distract myself. I need to like get out of here. Like, I almost took off my eye shades and like almost like got up because it was just too much for me to like go through that again. And I'm like sitting there checking my pulse, and I'm like, okay. But then I'm like, I've been through this so many times, like it's part of my story. I've been working on this for like over 20 something years at this point. But I think that just shows like how these experiences can still live inside of you. And so my nervous system just can't tolerate this experience. It's getting too overwhelming. And again, like I'm kind of getting into like, I need to get out of here. I need to like, get up, leave. I need to distract myself to make sure I'm like, okay. And then I had to come back and say, I have my breath. I know this is part of my story. I know I'm actually okay. I'm going to take a nice, big, deep breath into my stomach. I'm going to sit with the anxiety because I know this is going to pass, and just starting to breathe with the discomfort and starting to like figure out like, why is this anxiety coming up right now? Oh, okay. This is an old trauma. This is an old narrative. I can be with this. And so being able to stick with the breath, and the breath started to become the anchor in that situation, where I was able to really just ride through that experience without, going into like complete panic mode. Right. Like, I think if I like didn't have all that experience and, spent years working through this, and like, it was just like, again, new, like I probably would have tried to take off my eye shades and got up and probably left or walked around, or like, probably start screaming like help, and that happens, right? People that like, it's too much too quick, and like you don't have familiarity with that terrain, it can be really, really overwhelming. But again, I was like really thankful that I'm like, okay, like I have all this training, all this experience with like more somatic techniques and breath work. I can actually stick with this and let this experience ride out. I don't need to shut it down. I don't need to stop it. I can actually be with it and let it unfold. And that's what I did. I let that unfold by just sticking with it and breathing through it. And, I was able to get out on the other side. And, again, this is something that just comes up pretty often in these experiences, and something that, I'll probably continue to work through for the rest of my life in a way. But at least it's like I have that skill. I think in those early years, what would happen is that I would black out. Like, it would be too much, where I would just like kind of close my eyes and like just go into panic mode, and like, or I would start distracting myself. And like, just like, yeah, I would get into this like high alert panic mode, and just be completely like, in fear. And it's like I've tried to learn to work with it in different ways over the years. So that's like an example of like how that psychedelic could bring on an old trauma that could get you outside that window of tolerance. And then your nervous system is starting to react, whether it's that freeze or shutdown, or you're trying to like get out of the situation, you're in panic and fear, anxiety. And it's like, how do we use our breath to come back to this baseline so we can stick with the experience, to not fully suppress it, not fully get distracted by it, but, be able to be with it.
Mm. Huh. So that's kind of a good overall outline of breath work. I think it's a really safe method. It's an important method that people should learn. It's for me, it's the foundations of how I like to approach psychedelics generally. It's kind of very much in line with being as light on dogma as possible and high on technique. Like, here's the technique, here's how you be safe, and then go for it. Whatever happens is for you to sort out, and we can help you. Yeah. And there's so many ways, guys. There's so many ways to approach breath work. This is our thing is one method, one framework. There's so many ways. I think it's really important for people to spend time with breath work, things like vagal tone, sorted, things. I wouldn't be surprised if heart rate variability was impacted by different breathwork practices. Actually, I
Oh, it
remember,
totally is. Yeah.
yeah, I remember some clinicians actually doing that with me after my brain injury. Um, yeah, so there's a lot of fun stuff there, and a lot of room for growth. So
Yeah, I'm glad to see that there's like more research coming out too. So like I think like one of the breath work practices that has research around like heart rate variability is like resonance breath. So you're trying to drop your breath to around 6 breaths per minute. So you're really slowing the breath down. I was just digging up some papers around like the similarities between breath work and psychedelic states, and showing like what those like how breath work does have similar mechanisms as psychedelics with like default mode network, also the types of experiences of like this oceanic bliss that can come up in psychedelics and breath work, and then yeah, also like the increase in heart rate variability, which is really great to see. And yeah, there's these different types of breath work, right? You can do the more activating, intensified breathing, or you could do like this slow parasympathetic breathing that helps with the rest and digest and calming the nervous system. So then you can see breath as a tool, right? It's a flexible tool in which how do you use it in whatever case that you need. And I think that's why there's lots of different breathwork practices and techniques out there. Lots of different ways to approach it.
yeah, so um, if you want to learn more about breathwork, which I hope you do, please, please, please check out the course that Kyle just built, psychedeliciceducationcenter.com. We're doing a discount for a few days um, for the, what are we calling it? The holiday.
Called it
Um,
end of year sale or something like that.
so it's very limited time. So check it out if you want to save a little bit of cash. And it would be really great if you took it and let us know and tell your friends how much you liked
Yeah.
it. We really like teaching it live. We wanted to make it more accessible. So here's the more accessible version.
And we'll have some open office hours where you can drop in and chat, and then also planning some live online breathwork sessions. So there are those exercises. You can do everything online as like self-paced, but as you're talking, Joe, with like group process, like, it might be nice to find a time to get together to do an actual online breathwork experience with others, wherever they're calling in from. So we'll also plan a few of those where if you do join, and then we can do some also live online breathwork as well.
Yeah, great. And then stay tuned, everybody. We have so much coming, so much on the menu. We'll have some breathwork workshops that we'll be facilitating in the near term. So kind of full weekends or full days, which are exhausting but still pretty good. And then we've done, what was that, 2 in Breckenridge this year, which is really great.
Yeah,
Um,
it's fun.
yeah, and what else do we have coming up? That music program I'm developing. We got the digital security class that people should check out. It's really important if you're keeping records that you keep those records safe from all sorts of people. And then, yeah, I don't know. There's just so much. And we have some film screenings coming up. We've got a book club, Trip Sitting by Julian Vaney, is, I think, coming up mid next month. And in January, we have the film Last Journey. Reason TV put that together, and it's a short film of people in their kind of end of life era trying mushrooms and getting some
Cool.
relief. Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
And that's part of our navigators community to do the book
Right.
club and video. Yeah.
So psychedelicstoday.com/navigators if you want to join that. And Kyle and I are also offering up some coaching. So if you want to learn more about that, info at psychedelicstoday.com. That's for business and personal transformation stuff for hopes and dreams. Or, on my side, if you're trying to plan out what you're going to do on New Year's, I'm happy to help. And then, stuff like Burning Man. What are you going to do? How are you going to have a strategy for next year?
Yeah. Or if you've had like a client with difficult integration or psychedelic and needing some support or consultation there, happy to chat with folks about that too.
Yeah. So stay tuned. Keep tuning into Psychedelics Today. We've got a lot coming. We want to keep helping you. And thank you all for tuning in. Yeah, we're just peaking at 103 viewers right now on the streams, Kyle. So I'm like, do we stay? No, we should wrap. Got more work to do other than streaming. Yeah,
Maybe we'll
anything
do
you
a
want to
long
mention before
stream
we wrap?
day one day. That might be fun. Just hang out on here and answer questions and stuff.
Mhm.
No, yeah, if you're interested in learning more about breathwork, and again, this breathwork course just doesn't go over kind of like that long form, go over like lots of different practices and techniques there. And yeah, check that out, psychedeliceducationcenter.com. And yeah, for those that are celebrating holidays and traveling, safe travels wherever you're going or whatever you're doing. So hopefully you guys have a wonderful week.
All right. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And until next time, signing
Take
off.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.